Okay. Well, welcome everyone to GIS After Dark. I should probably say good evening wherever you are, or maybe good afternoon, or perhaps good morning. Again, thank you for joining us here. My name is Cassandra Hansen, and I'm the Program Director for GIS and Environmental Sciences and Policy at Johns Hopkins University Advanced Academic Program. And so if you're attending for your first time, just know that we offer an entire master's program online, so you can earn your master's degree in GIS. It's a nice, flexible program. And tonight's presentations is being recorded. And so if you've missed any of the past presentations or you want to come back and revisit tonight's presentation, it's available at our AAP GIS YouTube channel. And tonight's presentation will probably be posted early next week. So again, welcome. As folks that have attended in the past, you know that this speaker series highlights the amazing work that industry GIS professionals do. We also like to bring in Hopkins students as well as alumni, and also outside folks that are doing amazing work in the sector of GIS. And so throughout the presentation today, we encourage you to ask questions. There's many different ways that you could ask questions. You could put your question in the chat, or you could submit it in the Q&A little icon at the bottom of your screen. And I'm more than happy to put voice to your questions. And I will also be asking for audience participation tonight, so we can get an idea of folks' experience. So just out of curiosity, so to kind of warm up for participation, where is folks joining us tonight? Where are you coming from? So if you could go ahead and put that in the chat window, that would be excellent. So the participation question of the evening is, where are you coming from? Calgary, excellent. Welcome, Adam, nice to see you. St. Petersburg, Florida, Sarah, excellent. Oh, Portland, Maine, excellent, welcome. Still waiting for someone from the West Coast. We have to have a nice spatial distribution here. So again, thank you guys for participating. So I'm gonna go ahead, and we have a poll that we are gonna go ahead and launch. And this is just gives us an idea of your level of experience and background, or actually the first one is who you are, and are you a student, faculty, or general public? And so we'll go ahead and launch that one first. Nope, where's that poll? So the first one is the audience, and the second one is going to be your GIS expertise. So I'll give it a second. And I'm not seeing it, so let's just move on. It'll pop up in a little bit. Oh, there it is. There we go. Excellent. So the level of expertise, excellent. So folks that are attending tonight, 40% are GIS experts, 20% are familiar with GIS. Hey, 20% are new to GIS. Well, welcome. And then the other 20 has no background in GIS whatsoever. So perfect. You are in the right space. Welcome. The next poll is who's here. So student, alumni, and general public. Get those responses in as we close the pool and see who's here joining us tonight. Okay, perfect. Excellent. So we have 71% is the general public. Welcome, everyone. We have 14% faculty, staff, and 14% students. So again, welcome. Okay, so for those general public that's joining us tonight, just a little 30 seconds of overview about really what GIS is. And so let's go ahead and dive a little deeper and really break apart the components. So GIS is an acronym that stands for Geographic Information Systems, or otherwise known as GIS. So it allows for the creation and collection of geospatial information in the forms of simple maps or even application of our apps. So representing what is known is an overall goal for any GIS professional through the use of data collection, analysis, map creation, and apps. And we see that GIS is used in many different sectors. And so tonight we'll be talking about how it's used for crime analysis. So some examples about how GIS data can be displayed. And this is a proud instructor moment for me. So these are some of the final projects that were submitted last fall for the cartography and visualization class that I teach. And so we can see a wide variety of topics that are presented here, such as looking at shipping routes and looking at marine conservation areas around Antarctica. We also have one of our attendees tonight, Adam. He created a beautiful map looking at where the water flows that has been highlighted by Esri for the last couple of months now. So you can see a wide variety of different ways that we can communicate GIS information. So with that said, I am so excited to welcome tonight's presenter. And so she's going to be focusing on using GIS for crime analysis and law enforcement. And so we have Stacy Belledin here, and she is a consultant and former crime analyst. She is going to talk to us about how GIS plays an integral role in crime analysis and law enforcement. And she is the owner and director of Amplified Analysis Solution, LLC. And it is an organization dedicated to the enhancement of analytical capabilities for public safety agencies around the globe. And Stacy is an expert in the public safety field, and she has over 22 years of experience in law enforcement, crime analysis, and GIS training. And Stacy has previously worked as a consultant with Esri. She's an instructor and a writer of public safety training courses. She's also been a crime analyst for Jacksonville, Florida Sheriff's Office, as well as Lakewood, Colorado Police Department. And she has trained thousands of GIS analysts and crime investigators out there over the last years at various universities. And I am so thrilled to have you here, Stacy. I have been looking forward to your presentation this entire semester. And I just want to say thank you for being here tonight. And if I could ask that our audience give Stacy a virtual round of applause in the chat. So let's go ahead and give her a round of applause. Again, thank you for being here. And so what I will do is I will stop sharing and I will let you go ahead and get your slides ready. So again, Stacy, thank you for being here.
All right, thank you. That was a very nice welcome. I love it. All right, let's see here. See if you can see my screen. And we'll get going. Okay. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here to talk to you today about how it is that we use GIS in crime analysis and law enforcement. So again, my name is Stacy. I've been working in this field now for a long time, as you can see that Kathy was talking about, but I really love it too. And before I get into some of the slides, I have a long career in law enforcement. And I started out in law enforcement and crime analysis and fell in love with GIS. So back when I went to school, it really wasn't taught in the criminal justice programs. It is now, but it wasn't back in the day. So, I had to learn it on the job, and I just absolutely fell in love and really understood why it should be an integral part. And in the last 20 years, I've really seen it become a very, very important part of what we do in crime analysis and law enforcement. So I'm really excited to talk about that today. So I've also, like Kathy said, I've worked with Esri. So after I left my crime analysis roles, which we'll talk a little bit about during the presentation, I went to work for Esri as a training person. So I helped write and deliver content for public safety courses. So public safety courses for Esri focused on law enforcement, fire, emergency management, and 911 call taking kind of activity. So that was my role. And then I moved into more of a consulting, and I decided to venture off on my own and start doing more training and consulting that really focuses on how it is that we can enhance analytical capabilities for public safety. So, again, seeing that poll, we've got a lot of different people in this particular session that have different roles and different in general public, that kind of thing. And as GIS professionals know, GIS is for lots of different industries, right? It can be real estate, utilities, government, emergency management, you name it. But today we're going to discuss how it is that we can see how GIS is applied in law enforcement and even more specifically in crime analysis. And so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on. And then when we get to the Q&A session, feel free to ask me any questions that you have about, law enforcement itself, crime analysis, and how GIS plays a role. I'm really happy that you're here so we can talk about those things. So let me start off by, what is crime analysis? That might be something that you've heard of. You might have heard the term and you're like, okay, that has to be something like, CSI, that's some kind of crime scene investigation, or perhaps, that, kind of like Criminal Minds, that behavioral analysis, really trying to get into the minds of the offender. And don't get me wrong, those are very important professions, but that is not what crime analysis is. Crime analysis is a little bit different. So we're going to talk about what it is and how it's really important and how it plays a role in law enforcement as a whole. So crime analysis is a profession or a process, if you will, in which you have a set of different techniques, qualitative and quantitative. So data, and also things like interviews. But we use that information, we analyze data that's valuable to police agencies in our community. Right. We're data analysts. So we're a bunch of data geeks and we love our data. So, but what we do in law enforcement, similar to a lot of people that work in either data science or data analysis, is that we analyze the data, but in law enforcement, look at it for things like crime or calls for service or police operations. So it's really important for crime analysis in their profession to look at things like identifying and responding to emerging crime patterns or trends, looking at long-term chronic problems that have been affecting the community, suppressing hotspots, identifying points of intervention for offenders, and then also making sure that we educate the public and communicate information to the public about the safety and crime in their community. Crime analysis is really a very specialized profession. It has a breadth of skill sets that analysts need, even though it's very specialized. But we need to know things about crime and policing, both the theory and reality of it, because they are, they're very important. And sometimes the reality doesn't always add up to some of the theories that are out there. You need to have a thorough understanding of relational data and how it is that we use technology to mine databases. Statistical analysis. We need to have critical thinking skills. We need to know applied research methods. So all of the things, especially if you're a grad student, that you're learning and doing in grad school. Spatial analysis. So the GIS aspect comes in really important. We ask about trends and patterns, and it's the who, what, when, why, how, and there's the where. The where is a very important aspect, and we can't leave that out. So it's very important. We also have to have an understanding of how is it that we present analytical findings? How do we get that actionable information out there? And we use a plethora of information or applications for visualization as well. How is it that we communicate those findings? So there's a lot of things that we do and hats that we wear in crime analysis. There are also different types of crime analysis. So we talk mainly about crime analysis as being the umbrella of trends and patterns and all of these different things. How is it that we analyze the crime data? But we may have different focuses of crime analysis too. And I want to bring this up because there's lots of different ways that we can use GIS in all of these different types of crime analysis. So the first one there that you see in the green on the left is intelligence analysis. And intelligence analysis is really looking at people, right? Thinking about how people or groups of people, organizations, criminal enterprise is involved in crime activity. We look at things like prolific offenders, and then we try to use things like link analysis, criminal history, and relationships between crime and criminals to understand those trends and patterns. I'll tell you how GIS plays a role in that in a few minutes. There's also strategic analysis. Strategic analysis is looking at those long-term historical type of trends. Where are the hotspots over time, right? We might have something that flares up in this particular area, or we might have a problem that's happening right now, but is it a problem over time? And how do we look at that differently than if it was just something that's a little bit more tactical, which she'll talk about? So strategic analysis really looks at things like our long-term problems, chronic issues that are happening, and how is it that we can develop operational priorities once we look at those problems. So looking at scanning that information, looking at assessing it and seeing, what's happening, analyzing it, responding, all of those different things. We also have tactical crime analysis. Tactical crime analysis is my favorite. But what that does is it looks at the emerging trends. It's the emerging patterns that we have. There is a robbery pattern happening right now where someone is going in and they're robbing a specific type of bank, that kinds of thing. Those are things that are immediate. They're problems that we want to try to learn about and see if we can do something about them, whether it's preventing, apprehending a criminal, those kinds of things. So looking at those repeat incidents analysis, looking at short-term development of all of the different like patrol priorities. So do we need to do surveillance? Do we need to do some reconnaissance kind of things, or do we need to do things with investigative purposes? And then also, like, how is it that we look at identifying potential offenders that are having this? Okay, we've seen that this particular pattern has happened before. Do we need to look at, a potential pattern, and maybe this person has recently been released, those kinds of things. So that's tactical. And then there's the administrative. There's always administrative stuff in everything we do, right? So everybody has to do that. But that also is using GIS as well. So things like statistical analysis for reporting purposes, or having to, just know what it is going on in your community. Things like cost benefit analysis. It's analysis that's directing towards the needs of the agency. Are we meeting our goals and those sorts of things? So those are your administrative analysis. Now, all of this analysis that we do is based in theoretical foundation, right? So I'm not going to go into a whole theory of, crime and crime analysis tonight, because I wouldn't want to bore you to death. No, I'm kidding. I love it. But what I do want to focus on is that, first of all, crime analysis and policing is we focus on trying to reduce harm. We try to make it intelligence-led. We try to make it problem-oriented, and we try to make it evidence-based, right? I think that's where crime analysis becomes really important, is that we're trying to use the theory of crime analysis and evidence-based policing practices to help us understand trends and patterns. And so we can use that to respond better and have better policing in our communities. Now, when it comes to the theoretical foundations of crime analysis, a lot of them are place-based, okay? So we use things like environmental criminology, which helps us focus on the understanding of how crime incidents happen in the various aspects of things like environment and settings. Why are locations repeatedly used for specific activity? How do we understand the opportunity of crime? Typically, we have these different theories that say we have a motivated offender, we have, maybe a lack of guardianship, but we also have a suitable target. And those suitable targets are often places, right? They're not necessarily people, they're places. And so we can use that to understand where it is that we can see hot places or hot locations, and look at how it is that we can change the environment to help reduce and prevent crime. So a lot of our criminology, a lot of our theoretical foundations have shifted from back in the day in like the 1800s and early 1900s, where it was very offender based, to looking at it more place based and trying to really see if we can make an impact on how can we make it better on place. There's theories of repeat victimization. There's theories of near repeat victimization, both for for victims, for people, but also places. Why is it that one place gets victimized or burglarized or so forth, or people have like retail theft over and over again? We can look at those places and do something about those. Not only on, yes, we see where the crime's happening, but we can help understand what that environment is. And knowing what we know about environment, we can help do something about it. So some of these theories that are on the slide: problem analysis, rational choice theory, crime pattern theory, routine activities theory, all have place-based meaning. And so that's where we can start using things like GIS to really help us focus on how do we understand those things. You may have heard of Pareto principle, right? So 80% of something is usually is being contributed by only 20% of a phenomenon. In crime analysis, we think about 80% of the crime is really happening at maybe 20% of the places, or 80% of the crime is occurring because of 20% of the offenders. So typically that works in what we do in crime analysis, and we can use those principles as well in GIS to understand, okay, what are our repeat locations and what can we do about those? So lots of different theoretical foundations of crime analysis are based in um, GIS, in place, in location. We also have a lot of data. Another reason why it's so fun to use GIS in crime analysis. There are a lot of different data sets that we have access to at a police department. If unfortunately you've ever had to call for any kind of police service, you typically call either 911 or maybe even a non-emergency number and say, hey, somebody broke into my car, right? When that happens, there is a call for service, and automatically we have information on calls for service. So we know who and where and what people are calling the police about. And so we have calls for service data. Let's say a crime did occur, then there is a report that is taken. And in that report, you have information, and that is the crime data. So we have things like offense, where it happened, how it happened, and when it happened, those kinds of things that are in a police report. And that's the crime data. It's also called a records management system. So you'll hear RMS system. Let's say they arrest somebody that had, committed that crime. We have arrest data. But police also look at things like crashes and traffic citations. So we have citation and crash data. We have things like body cameras. So we have body camera data. We have LPR, which is license plate readers data. They have intelligence data. So data on, different known offenders. We have personnel data. You name it, there's data on it. We do a lot of things with officer movement, so that for officer safety purposes. So things like AVL. So we might look at, what's going on in a car. There's a lot of different data sets that are in crime analysis in law enforcement. Why GIS is so valuable to that is because GIS is really good at handling a lot of these disparate data sets and just being able to layer them, right? To be able to make and add all these different layers into, your application. Once it's in there, then you can start looking for things like trends, patterns, using geoprocessing tools that can help you point out, hey, we have an intersection of this kind of data here and this kind of data here. And so maybe this is where we need to focus our problems, right? So a lot of the data that we have is really rich. And crime analysis data has location, right? We have the where. So that's where GIS can be very, very helpful. So when we start looking at how it is that we use GIS for crime analysis, I'm going to talk about it in kind of the big chunks of how it is that we process crime analysis or how we go through the crime analysis process. The first thing we do is we take our data and we organize it, right? You got to organize your data and manage your data. And for a lot of us analysts, because those data sets that I had on the previous slide, a lot of it's tabular in nature or relational data sets that we have in databases, it's not yet ready for GIS. So we might have to prepare it and get it ready for GIS. And so what we typically do is we bring it into the GIS, and we might use, if we're lucky to have something like an XY coordinate or lat long, we would bring that in and we use those to add it to a map. But oftentimes we have this, disparate data sets that don't have that. So we geocode. And so we use the geocoding process using that address location to add it to a map. We also have, not the most perfect data. When you work for, let's say, a large agency like I did at Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, where there are 1,600 sworn officers, chances are you're going to have some errors and some erroneous data and some things that you could probably have a little bit better in your data. So, or you might have something like a field type of date really isn't a date, it's a text field. So little things that you don't think about that are important when you start getting into the analysis thing that you need to repair. So we spend quite a bit of time and we use the tools, and they're very valuable in GIS, to help prepare our data for analysis. We may also enhance our data for analysis. So using things like the enrich tool, there's a tool that helps you use population and demographic information to really understand your community a little bit better. I can use them to calculate crime rates because I have population, or I can get daytime population, or I can understand if we have an emergency where our at-risk population is, and we can go and help them. So there's a lot of really cool things that we can do with enhancing our data for analysis. And then Again, these are large data sets, so it's really important for us to be able to filter and select that data. So we do a lot of data analysis, or I'm sorry, data organization and data management using a GIS. It's, either by attribute or, of course, using spatial analysis, spatial location, and saying location-based queries. And I'll show you some examples of what those could look like in a minute. The other thing we do is then we start to getting into the analysis phase. And so there's many things that we do that's more on that administrative level. In there, it says ComStat. ComStat is a meeting that it started in New York Police Department, so NYPD, back in the early 2000s. This was started by Commander Bill Bratton at the time. And what the meeting is, ComStat is a meeting that is everybody gets together, all the commanders, all of the command staff, and the crime analysts, and they look at what's going on in their community. They talk about what's happening with crime and what is it? Is it going up? Is it going down? Is it increasing, decreasing? And what should we do about it? So it was created to help us understand crime problems in the community, but also to hold people accountable for them and making sure that we are doing something about it. So ComStat has been around for about 20 years now, and many agencies have they either call it ComStat or some ComStat-esque kind of meeting, so to help with things like crime problem management. And so we are able to use GIS to help us with some of that administrative analysis to try to get us on, what are the hotspots, what's happening right now. And this particular dashboard that's on the slide, the screenshot, is actually an ArcGIS solution. This is from the Crime Problem Management and Crime Reduction Statistics solution that's through Esri. It's a really cool dashboard that you can create by putting in all of your different crime data, and it can tell you things like it counts and summarizes your data by crime type in different districts. It can tell you whether or not we have percent changes of increases or decreases. And it also uses z-scores, so Poisson distribution z-scores, to determine, well, is it above a standard deviation? Is it below standard deviation? Are we really seeing, is it above normal, and do we need to worry about it? Or is this in normal standards? Is it 3-year or 5-year normal standards? So it's important to do that because, percent changes, if you have something that's a low volume crime and it went from 3 to 6 in 1 year, that seems like a big jump. But if that's in the normal range, it makes sense. But what's great is that you can use GIS to do that. And then also with the interactivity of things like ArcGIS dashboards, you can then select out specific areas and then be able to run those statistics very quickly again. It's really nice. Very, very cool tools. But there's also some really neat tools in ArcGIS Pro, that is another solution. It's called the Crime Analysis Solution. And it's basically a toolbar that has been provided by the Esri ArcGIS Solutions team. And what they've done is they've put a lot of the commonly used tools that we use in crime analysis in a toolbar, so that folks that are trying to learn about crime analysis and how it is that they might use GIS for crime analysis are in one toolbar, one tab on ArcGIS Pro, and it's amazing. So there's tools that have actually been created for the crime analysis toolbar to help us with things like, how do I count my crimes per district? And what's the breakdown of the crime type on those? How do I calculate percent change from year to year? And how can we render that and look at that on a map? So there's some really cool tools there. The next thing we might do is things like tactical and strategic analysis. So looking at some of those different types of crime analysis that we do. So here we might do things like calculate kernel density. We use kernel density estimation so we can see things like, where the concentration of crimes are. We also use a lot of the tools in the spatial statistics tools sections of the toolbox. There's some really cool things in there that can help us with statistically significant clustering of hotspots and cold spots when it comes to things like crime and calls for service and all kinds of different things. So the map on the left there shows the emerging hotspot analysis. So emerging hotspot analysis takes not only location, which is very important, but time into consideration. And so it creates what's called a space-time cube, which always cracks me up. It sounds very Star Trek-y, doesn't it? We take what's called the space-time cube, And we create a 3D dimensional type of file that houses not only your data as XY coordinates, but also your time, which are in bins. And it can tell you, well, yes, you've had a hotspot here, but is it getting worse? Is it getting cooler? Is it sporadic? And so forth. So it really gives you a good idea of how things are trending and what's going on. We also have a tool that's called the 80/20 analysis tool. I talked about that Pareto principle. So this can help us understand our problem locations or street segments by creating things like either graduated symbols and telling us, this particular hotspot represents 4%, 5%, 10%, whatever of the crime activity that's happening. And we can look at that on a level to see cumulatively, maybe we have 20% of the locations that are accounting for 80% of the crime. All right. So there's some tools that'll help us do that as well. We also have tools that'll help us forecast from historical data whether or not we might see crime in particular areas. Now, a lot of people talk about like predictive analysis and that kind of thing. You can call them predictive type tools because we're using historical data and the algorithms help us understand based on criminal theory, things like repeat victimization and near repeat victimization, on whether or not we might have crime in these areas in particular timeframes. And so there's some really interesting tools that can help us with this. These are really helpful for things like robberies and burglaries and so forth. So lots of different tools that are available for things like crime analysis that's strategic and tactical. We also use it a lot for things like intelligence or investigative analysis. So, once you start getting in, let's say, a pattern, you have this pattern and you're starting to investigate it, or let's say you do have a suspect that emerges, you might do things like, get a subpoena to get the cell phone records to see, well, can we see if they have been in those locations of where those crimes were, and kind of use that information to help build a case, right? And so there are tools in the crime analysis solution that have been created to help us analyze cell phone records. So being able to plot or place cell phone records on a map, it's not as easy as you would hope it is, but it's something that it can be done mainly because of the way that the data comes in from, the different cell phone subscribers. But regardless, it can be done, and then you can do analysis on them. So the map that's on the left, there's a tool that we use to help us find evidence to hypothesize that two people were in roughly the same place at the same time, or at least at the same place so we can say, look, we know that they have a nexus of being in that same area at the same time. Maybe they're colluding, maybe there's something going on, maybe they're not at the same time, but maybe it's a drug drop off. So all these different things that we can start thinking about, there are tools that can help us do that, putting people in the same place at the same time. We also have tools for things like movement patterns. If we have a pattern, is it moving east to west? Is it moving in a zigzag? Is it moving around in an interstate kind of loop? Those kinds of things. So looking at those kinds of relationships. And then also finding relationships between entities. So trying to determine, is there anything related? So we have things like a tool called, it's a terribly named tool, but it makes sense. The Generate Origin Destination Links tool. Let's say we have auto thefts. Okay? We have some auto thefts. Typically, the car is recovered, and there is an auto recovery location too. Are there any relationships between where the car was stolen and where the cars were recovered? And so you can look at different patterns and trends, and you can see things like, do we have a location that we're seeing a lot of the recoveries from, but then they're also being stolen from a specific area? So using those kinds of tools help us really understand some of those spatial patterns. And then maybe that's where we start looking at doing some enforcement. Okay. We also then use ArcGIS to create and share a lot of the different products that you can make in a GIS. So of course there's maps. Now, one thing, and I was actually talking to Cassie because, by the way, those maps were beautiful. I love looking at maps. One of my favorite things to do is, if you ever get to UC, is to be able to go to the map gallery and look at all the glorious maps that people make. It's amazing. I'm not one of those people. I am not the best cartographer, but the reason why, and I was telling Cassie about this, is that as a crime analyst, I feel like even if I never had to print out another map again, ever, I would still use GIS, because the power of GIS is not only making beautiful maps, it's spatial analysis, right? It's being able to really understand where in a different way that, and yes, you're visualizing it, but some of the tools that are available can really help you understand clustering and patterns and trends and those kinds of things. So yes, it's important to make beautiful maps, and I love making beautiful maps, but I also make maps that are like, here's the meat and potatoes of it, and this is the analysis. But we do that, and we still make maps, and we also use a lot of the charts that are available. Chart tools are amazing in ArcGIS Pro. There's some reporting capabilities, dashboards, you name it. We're using a lot of the different products, applications that are available in GIS, in ArcGIS to create those things. And so that's kind of how we look at the process, right? We manage our data, or we mine our data. We analyze that data. We then have to figure out how is it that we are going to create analysis products for that. So that's a lot of the things that we do in crime analysis. But I will say this: crime analyst work is never done. We always help others in the community and our agency. And typically, in most cases, unless you're at a larger agency, and a crime analyst might be one of the only people in the department that has some GIS experience or has GIS savvy. Chances are there's not a whole lot of people that have the know-how to create maps, create apps, and so forth. So a lot of times we help assist other departments in creating maps and apps for, oh my goodness, all the kinds of purposes. And so on the slide here are some of the different things that we also help with, because not just crime analysis needs it in law enforcement. Everybody needs GIS in law enforcement. And so we do a lot of things with patrol. All right. So helping things like, how can we monitor things like calls for service, conditions, field awareness apps. So if they're out in the field and we need to help them with field awareness, we can help with those things like tactical operations, detail planning for operations, capturing field interviews, story maps for things like roll call briefings. A roll call is every morning when the officers come in, or every shift. There's usually a roll call, and they have briefings that talk about what either happened the day before or their last shift and that kind of thing. We can have story maps that help them with briefings, which is a really cool tool to use, that can help them with maps and those kinds of things. So lots of different things. For investigations, we use story maps again for things like investigative briefings. I've used them many times for taking a lot of the evidence and all the things that I've created, so maps and so forth, putting it in a story map, and then giving it to the state attorney or district attorney's office for their purposes, so that they could decide whether or not they're going to take take it to trial, a case to trial, that kind of thing. And it really helps because, again, story maps tell a story, and it really shows, from start to finish what happened. And we have all of these maps and apps that can help us do that. So we help collect canvas information for major cases. Let's say we have some, a missing person. We have helped collect things like using Survey 123. So lots of different things there, as well as, uh, special teams. So line of sight analysis, things like camera placement, if we needed to place cameras for anything, critical infrastructure surveys, tactical plans. We do a lot of special event management, right? And I say special event. Special events are usually the ones that are planned and we know about, but there's a lot of event management too. Right now, there's a lot of protests that are happening. And so it's important for us as police to be able to stay on top of that, knowing where our patrol is for officer safety, knowing where we might have roadblocks and all that kind of stuff. So we use GIS for event management as well. And then there's making sure we communicate to the community. So things like apps and a hub for transparency purposes, public records requests, if we can give data to them and be able to see what's happening near me, near my house, that being able to be transparent with that. And then also helping collect things like and manage citizen tips or complaints or those kinds of things. Lots of different ways that GIS can be very beneficial in law enforcement. So I just have a few more slides to kind of wrap up, some of the questions that come up a lot in crime analysis, or a question that you might see that you might not necessarily think of as location based, but they really are. And these questions come up. I've had to answer all these questions before. Can you tell me if residential burglaries are near the high school? Um, was there any movement pattern? Like, did you see anything kind of interesting in that cargo theft ring that we had? What are those risky places in the neighborhood that could be affecting crime? All of these different questions have a place-based part of it, right? And so in order to answer those, could we answer those without GIS? Yeah, but it's going to be really, really difficult. GIS makes this a lot easier. The tools that are available, the visualization, bringing in the data is really key in how it is that we can analyze crime, all different types of crime. So tactical, strategic, intelligence, administrative, in crime analysis. So it helps us making decisions that are location based. It helps us with investigations. It helps us understand where we can direct patrol and support strategic goals for optimizing police operations. The goals of modern policing is to prevent crime, to increase community safety, and to build public trust and confidence in the police. All right, that's what we want to do. And so crime analysis is a crucial component in those goals because we can use the data to make evidence-based decisions and help build that trust within the community. So for those of you that are interested in crime analysis, if you're interested in crime analysis, there is a wonderful association called the International Association of Crime Analysis or Crime Analysts. It has almost 6,000 members. It probably might tip the scale. I think this was back in January, so we may have tipped the scales, but it's a wonderful association. Their website has a discussion board that has a gazillion different posts about crime analysis. There's one on GIS and how we use crime analysis. There's also a training course that is right now a GIS fundamentals, which is an ArcGIS Pro using crime analysis techniques. So if that's something you're interested in, that is something that's available as well there. And we have an annual training conference as well that usually has a lab that's sponsored by Esri. So there's a whole track of Esri related or GIS related courses that are the whole week, and it's a sponsored lab, so they have computer setups and everything. So it's a really great opportunity to learn about GIS and crime analysis too. So if you're interested, it's cheap. It's $25 a year, which is very inexpensive for a professional organization. So I highly recommend it. And the website there is on the page. If you have any questions about that, let me know. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to let you answer or ask any questions that you might have for me. But I really enjoyed talking to you today about, how it is that GIS plays such an important role in law enforcement and crime analysis. So thank you.
Excellent, Stacy. Thank you so much. Very interesting. Let's give Stacy a round of applause in the chat. I know I have questions and I'll open it up to the audience. So as folks are creating their questions, a quick question for you, based on the work that you do, how much of it is proactive, where like trainings versus reactive? Like if you could think about the distribution of your work.
So as a crime analyst, let me kind of start like one of my typical work week. Like I come in on a Monday. And the first thing I would do is I would start looking at what happened over the weekend, right? And so as an analyst, it's always important to kind of keep on top of what's happening. So that is somewhat proactive, but at the same time, there are crimes that happen and you do need to react, or if something happens really quick, you need to react. I remember once that we had, oh my goodness, what was it? It was on Thanksgiving. We had, an Amber Alert go out. It was a child abduction, and so something like that happens, you get right into it and you react. So the nature of policing can be very reactive, right? So if something happens, if something is happening, we have to drop what we're doing, which might be proactive and react to it. But the analyst also has the opportunity to, really delve into the data, understanding those long-term trends. And that's where there might be a problem, but we can be proactive on how is it that we approach it. So, I would say it's probably a 50-50. The reactive might even be like, okay, that's just the mundane administrative stuff that we have to do. But at the same time, those things like preparing for ComStat meetings or really understanding what's going on in your community might see emerging trends, and then you're proactive about putting out things like what's called a bulletin and letting other agency knows, hey, we have some of these crimes, be on the lookout, letting your department know, and also letting the public know.
Thank you. Thomas has a question, and thank you for asking this one, Thomas. I had the same one as well. What does the geocoding process look like, and how do you deal with conflicting records?
Oh, geocoding. So it varies from agency to agency, but a lot of agencies do work with either like their city department or county GIS to make sure that we have a pretty good composite locator, because we do have, just like a lot of places, we have a lot of data issues. And one of the issues that we have the most is, is addresses. So we do our best by making sure that the addresses are clean, first of all. So that geocoding process of making sure that we have clean data. But many of them have built address locators that are composite in nature. So being able to maybe have things that are in, starting with like maybe a master name or sorry, master address index. And then going through, okay, because a lot of times we'll have things that happen at intersections. We need to do things like also have street intersections. So there's a lot of different, processes that we make sure that it goes through to get as good of a match as we can. Now, I do know that there are some agencies that still really, dive into making sure that things match, because, depending on where you're at, I know that, if you have something like a northwest, northeast, making sure all of your different street directions are good. It can be a process, but once you usually have it worked out and you make sure that you have decent addresses on the front end, the geocoding process then becomes easier, right? It's really just making sure that the data that comes into it, that's ingested, is okay. As far as conflicting records, I've been fortunate enough to where I haven't worked in an agency that has had a lot of conflicting records, but I do know that there are some agencies that have, that do deal with those. And so I think what's happened there a lot of times is that they're working as closely as they can with their GIS departments to try to understand why they're getting conflicting records and how is it that they can resolve it. So, but I do know, like, I know down in South Florida, that's been an issue for many, many years because of the nature of addresses being, that kind of thing. So, but that's a good question.
All right,
Chances are
thank you.
what we love is just to have XY coordinates, but
In the perfect world, right? We all wish that.
Yep.
Okay, so we have a question from Amanda, a Hopkins alumni. And she wants to know if you use remote sensing in your work, and if so, what are some examples?
So there's definitely some remote sensing. I'm trying to think of a good example of one that we use. I know that like right now, some of the different things that we've been using, so we have license plate reader data. What a license plate reader does is, let's say we have a vehicle that we are particularly looking for, that we know that the vehicle has been cited before in a neighborhood and it's a really high risk vehicle. What we can do is we can use a license plate reader, which is a camera, but it also remote senses like, the license plate. And so we can use that in different places. And sometimes the license plate reader is on a police vehicle. So we try to see where is it that we are seeing more of the hits than not. So that's one example. Trying to think of some other examples. I know that we're starting to look at using some remote sensing for just officer safety purposes, like where are our people when we have things like, if we're doing some kind of tactical operation. So those kinds of things. But I personally haven't used a ton of them, but I know that it's definitely something that is becoming more of a trend in policing. We are starting to see things like drones as well used. So that's something that, using them for things like, if we have a stand-up situation, if we have some sort of uh, a traffic crash that's bad that we want to, get some overhead views, and then also for special event management, that kind of thing.
Excellent. Thank you. Adam has a question. He actually has two questions, but I'm going to ask the first one and then follow up with the second one. Do you revisit time series forecast models for crime prediction in order to validate your forecast results against future events, rather than validating against historical events only? For example, did a predicted event actually occur?
Absolutely. I'm one of those that, I would like to see, I'm like, did it occur? And are we seeing that kind of thing on a regular basis? So the reason why I do that is because there's a couple different ways that we look at, predicting or forecasting crime. We of course use time as part of that aspect, but we use location as well. If I'm working a historical set of data and we're just trying to say, hey, patrol, we're going to use a year's worth of crime, or that kind of say this is where we saw burglaries in this neighborhood according to the forecast models. This is where we would probably see this in the next month or so. Okay, so using those repeat and near repeat tools, that's what they're called, we can do that. I always want to go back and see, well, did it work? Let's look at the assessment, or was it displaced? Was it something that's different like that? So when I'm doing that for more of that kind of strategic, trying to show patrol where it is that they need to go, that's the kind of tool that I would use. For things like patterns. So let's say I have a robbery series, and I have a robbery series that is going on, and they're hitting all over the place, but I don't really understand yet the pattern. I use things like some of the descriptive tools that are in the spatial statistics toolbox to see, like, what's the distribution of the pattern. So looking at things like, what's the mean distributor, or the mean center, or the mean central feature? Where is all of the crimes within, like using the standard deviation ellipses to try to understand, how is it in directional distribution? Using those tools, and then using also, like, okay, now we know that this is kind of where they are. We know that there's, let's say, they're hotel robberies. We know that there's another hotel in this area, and it's saying that most of them are happening there. That's where I'm going to forecast that they go. And this is where we send officers for things like surveillance and stakeouts and that kind of thing. And it is important to relook at that, especially with patterns and trends that are really tactical in nature like that, because you might have another one in 2 days. And so if you predicted it right, you're like, great. But if you didn't, you're like, what happened? The problem is, and I won't say a problem, what's hard about that and challenging in criminalisis is that we work in our jurisdiction, right? So I worked for Lakewood Police Department. Lakewood Police Department is a suburb of Denver. If I didn't know that something happened in Denver, it skews my results, right? So it's really important as an analyst that we get information out there to say, hey, look, I had these crime types. This is what happened. This is the MO. Anybody have any others? So that we can really make sure that we have the complete picture when we're doing our analysis. Otherwise, it may not be the best representation. So it's not as easy as we would want it to be, as in like clicking the button in crime analysis. You really have to dig and make sure that you have a complete data set.
Excellent. You actually answered part of his second question. But yeah, his question was, in looking at the historical and analysis prediction, do they then put more officers on corners where there's certain crimes taking place, or allocate, more resources to a particular neighborhood as a result? And you answered that. So yeah.
Absolutely. And a lot of initiatives start with things like hotspots. Where are we seeing them? Do we see it moving? Do we see, and then we help patrol be directed in those different areas using those kinds of tactics. Yeah, absolutely.
Perfect. So I think this might be the last question for tonight, but the last one coming in from one of our amazing program coordinators. Rachel has a question. She said, is there a consideration for bias in either the data collection process or in the display of the data on public facing web pages?
So I always say that there could be bias, right? I think could be bias in any data. Um, crime analysts are using a data set that is being reported to them, right? So are we getting all data? Do we know all crime? Do we know that every victim has been, that's in the data? Probably not. So we worry about bias with that. Um, I've also, as an analyst, looked at things like use of force. Are we seeing, it's important to police ourselves too, right? To be when we're looking at things like bias and equity and making sure that we are being fair and equitable in our practices as law enforcement too. So many agencies are using their data to look at things like are we seeing things that are we pulling over people of a particular color more than others, making sure that we're not doing that. So it's really important to start looking at that kind of data for bias. And it's an analyst's duty to make sure that if they see that, they report that and understand how is it that we can look at changing those practices to make sure that we're being transparent and we're being fair and equitable in an agency. Absolutely.
Excellent. And actually, there's one more question that came
Sure.
in. Chris wanted to know, so in your discussion, we were, when talking about how changes can be made or, looking at different patrols in different locations, is there also a need or ability to improve infrastructure? So for example, adding new, street lights where there's lots of crime, or, like patrolling more blocks or something like that, kind of like that afterthought, what can you add to this area? Can you just provide some examples, additional examples of how that can be used?
Sure. So there's a whole, uh, I want to say subcategory of analysis that's called problem analysis. And
Mhm.
so we might analyze that we've got problem and it may be a short-term problem, but over time we see that it's a long-term problem, or maybe it's something that we just see over and over again. It's not smart as police to slap a band-aid on the problem, just knowing that the band-aid's going to rip off at some point and that it's going to happen again. So what we do is we look at those problems and we respond by what is it that we can do to prevent crime? What can we do to reduce the opportunity? I talked earlier how environmental criminology plays a role. There's the problem analysis triangle pretty much tells us we have to have a suitable target. We have to have, a motivated offender. Well, that suitable target, what makes it suitable? And what can we do to change it to make it less suitable for somebody to be motivated to commit a crime there? And so doing just those things, crime prevention through environmental design, that's what it's called CPTED, being able to use those principles to say, what can we do to make that environment better? Is it better lighting? Is it egress and ingress for fencing? Is it what else? Better landscaping, like just little things like that, making sure that there's no posters or on the windows of convenience stores so people can see in and out. All kinds of different things that is been data driven can help us with that. Last thing I'll say about that is that there is a thing called the 25 techniques of situational crime prevention. I know it's wordy. 25 techniques of situational crime prevention. And it tells us how it is that we can reduce the risk. How can we enhance the rewards for making sure that no crime happened? There's some really cool techniques that helps with just that you're talking about.
Mm. Thank you, Stacy. This is wonderful. And folks, I hope you enjoyed the presentations as much as I did, and I certainly learned a lot. And I just want to say thank you for being here tonight and taking the time to meet with us. And hope to see you at the Esri's Users Conference.
Yes, and if you want to see the Safety and Security Summit, which is law enforcement and public safety related, is the weekend before UC. So see you there.
Perfect. All right. And so that really concludes the end of this semester's GIS After Dark. And I just want to thank you all for being here. And we will pick up GIS After Dark. We have a great lineup for the fall. So we will pick up at the beginning of the fall semester. For folks that are attending tonight who are graduating, I want to say congratulations. I hope to see you at graduation, but if not, our paths will cross again. And with that said, I just want to say have a good evening, everyone. And again, Stacy, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.